Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this presentation by Mission Critical Institute of the CISSP Exam Prep Clinic number 1. This is the first in a series of 5 exam clinics that we'll be doing, and this one will be looking specifically, we'll be looking specifically at the computerized adaptive testing, which is basically the new format for the exam that the CISSP will be using. Now, I want to point out that in your, we only have 30 minutes for this webinar, so I'll be moving through a pretty good pace. Please feel free to enter questions into the chat session or into the question session on your interface. We may not be able to get to them in this session, but certainly they will be responded to within as quickly as possible afterwards. So with that said, let us move forward with the presentation. So 18th of December 2018, CISSP looked at how they were doing things with the CISSP exam, and they decided to go to a new format, the computerized adaptive testing format. Now, as of this time, it only applies to the English language version. Okay, the other languages still have the older fixed version format, where you have a 6-hour time limit and you have a 250 question format. So, what is computer adaptive testing? Well, we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail, but it is still a computer-based testing format. Okay, that hasn't changed. You will still sit down at a computer. You will still work through a computer-based interface, and you will still get results at the end of that exam. The difference is that the exams, the questions that will be asked will be specifically tailored to the individual abilities of the test taker. If I have someone who has 2 years experience and someone who has 5 years experience and someone who has 10 years experience in a certain thing, I'm going to ask those people different questions. Same concept here. Okay, if you are at a different level, you'll get more difficult questions being asked of you. Now, when we do a side-by-side in terms of the format of those, let's take the old style computer-based testing, we'll just call it, format, which was the existing format before the December 18th change. Now, it was a linear fixed format, i.e., there was a set of 250 questions, and you could procedurally go through those questions, and you had up to 6 hours to do that. There was 250 questions total. Now, in both cases, there is 25 questions that are set aside for what's called psychometric evaluation. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, you could one of the major differences between computer adaptive testing and computer-based testing is with the computer-based testing, you can mark questions for later review. Okay. The format in both tests is going to be similar in terms of mostly A, B, C, D type questions, some true, false, some not questions, some scenario questions. But the computer-based testing will apply to all languages except for English. Okay. Now, let's flick across now to the adaptive testing in the third column. Up to 3 hours. That confuses people a little bit because they're going to say, well, actually, how long is it? Well, it depends on how well you answer questions. Okay, there's going to be anywhere between 100 and 150 questions. The minimum is 100 questions. Now, because 25 of those questions could be set aside for psychometric evaluation, the actual grading has been done on 75 questions, and we'll talk about how that works when we come to a slide pertaining to the ending of the exam during this clinic. Now let's talk about those 25 questions. Okay, what is the point of those? CISSP looks to maintain a bank of questions, up-to-date, current, appropriate questions that they can randomly select an exam from at any point in time. And they're looking to maintain a bank of somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 questions. So that means that in that bank of questions, there's going to be old questions that no longer apply. So they want to introduce new questions. But what is a new question? How appropriate is it? Well, that's what those 25 questions do. They get put into the exams and they get used to see how people respond to them. And for that reason, they're not tested, they're not scored. They simply, ISC squared are looking to see how, if everyone answered the question correctly, then it's too easy. If no one answers it, it's too hard. They're looking for somewhere in between. Okay, so the computer adaptive test will have a minimum of 100 questions, up to a maximum of 150 questions. 25 of those don't count. So really, you're talking 75 to 125 in terms of the range. It's going to be the same format. It's going to be mostly ABCD type format or true/false format or something similar to that. And we'll talk about the formats in one of the later clinics. Focused only on English language, and in both the computer-based testing and the adaptive testing, you can take breaks, but be cautious of that. It makes sense to take breaks when you're doing a 6-hour exam. 6 hours is an awful long time. But remember that if you take a break in the adaptive test, then the clock doesn't stop, okay? So it keeps running, and you're still going to have up to 3 hours. And once you hit that 3-hour limit, the exam is done, and then the system will assess how well you've done within that 3-hour period. So it's, if you're feeling that you need to take a break because, I don't know, you're feeling nauseous, or you're not focusing correctly, and maybe getting up and getting the blood flowing would be a good thing, I would say go do it. Otherwise, be cautious about using that time. Now, in the case of both the computer-based and the adaptive, you work through Pearson VUE to actually schedule the exam. What you actually do is you phone ISC squared, you purchase a voucher from them, and then when you go onto Pearson VUE's website, it'll ask you for that voucher number, and then you schedule location, time, and so on. But you've already paid ISC squared for the voucher. So that is the kind of the side-by-side in terms of what it's looking at. Now, in terms of the content, in terms of the content of the exam, that doesn't change. This graphic you can get from ISC Square's website, and it breaks down the 8 different domains in the CISSP exam, and it talks about the statistical ratio of questions being asked for each domain. So, for instance, we're looking at in security and risk assessment domain, 15% statistical of the total questions could be coming from that domain. Okay, my point is that content doesn't change, but the format that the exam presents to you in terms of how you get asked is going to change. So, with that being said, let's look a little bit more at the concept of the computerized adaptive testing. Now, before I do that, I want to introduce the concept in terms of something that would make sense to a lot of people. If you are teaching someone words, okay, say a child, you're not going to start them with hard words. You're going to start them with easy words. And let's say you have a game where if they get certain words correct spelling-wise or so on, they get a certain number of points. Well, you may have your 3-point words like cat, dog, fox. If they're getting all of those correct, maybe you'll move up to 5-point words. If they're getting all of those correct, maybe you move up to 10-point words. The adaptive testing concept is exactly the same, okay? And I see that someone's just put in the audience, so has the CAT testing already started for English test? Yes, it started on December 18th of 2018. Wait a second. It would be 2017. I'm sorry, I got that date wrong. Thank you for that. because it's already in play. So my apologies that date on the PowerPoint was incorrect. So yes, it is in play, and I'll give you also then some feedback I have from some people who I've taught who have taken the exam. So based on the concept of the different levels of difficulty of words, okay, let's take that now and apply it to the concept of the adaptive testing. Okay, so what happens with this? You have a computer-based test, and candidates are going to be presented with words that are tailored to their ability. And it works in a certain way, okay? First of all, in order to be able to figure out what is a candidate's ability, you're going to have to start with a baseline. That's where your 3-point words come in, okay? So the candidate is going to be presented with a question that will be below the level of difficulty required to pass the exam. Okay, now that seems strange, but that's the starting point. If they get that question correct, then they move to a more difficult question. If they get that question correct, they move to a more difficult question after that. So each time the candidate will answer a question, the computer system will evaluate their ability to get the next question correct based upon the answer in the previous question, and then it will present a question. So it may be that you may not go to a 5-point question from a 3-point. It may be that you'll go to a 4-point, or maybe you'll jump straight to a 10-point question, entirely based upon how your history of answering questions has been. Okay, and it's the system, the algorithm that's being used is assuming that there's a 50% chance of a question being answered correctly. So based upon that, okay, what that means is the more questions that you can answer correctly, the more difficult the test is going to become. And as the candidate answers more and more questions, the computer's estimate of their ability becomes, number one, more precise, and number two, more advanced. So it's therefore going to ask them more and more difficult questions. Okay, so here's the thing: there's no going back. Okay, so you've got to be careful to have good discipline when you come to answering questions. Okay, part of the feedback that I've got from people who've done this exam is that they felt more pressured, and so it's a question of slowing down, being in the moment. Forget about what happened before. Forget about what's coming up in the future. Focus on the question that's in front of you at that point in time. Think about the context of the question. Think about the answers that are being given, and answer to your best ability at that point in time. Okay. The way that the question, and when we come to the slide about how the exam ends, you'll see that you're aiming to rack up a certain amount of points in a certain amount of time based upon the computer's assessment of how you've done. So what about those questions? Okay, well, it's a variable length adaptive test. That means that you have different number of questions and different amount of time that you're going to take to do the exam. So there's going to be 100 to 150 questions. The questions do not count equally because, like we've said, there's 3-point question, there's 10-point questions, there's 20-point questions. Now, I'm just using those scoring as an example. The way the actual system scores it is probably not that way, but you need to understand that questions will be different, and it's not always easy to be able to kind of figure out what level of question am I on. I would say that the best rule of thumb would be if you're getting asked questions about definitions, okay, then that's probably a relatively easy question. Whereas if you're asking questions about how something is used or how it applies or to make a distinction between things, then that's a little bit more difficult. So you'll get a kind of a sense of where you're at in terms of the questions that you're being asked. Also, remember that the questions are randomly chosen. So don't expect to get, oh, I'm going to get asked, 5 questions on access control, and then I'm going to get asked 5 questions on encryption and so on. No, it's random. So you could get one on access control, then the next question could be physical security, then the next one could be encryption, then the next one could be risk assessment. So you just don't know. That's why it's important to really understand the entire 8 domains and understand what the concepts behind the information in those domains is. Now, what if you keep getting easy questions? Well, the one thing that people who have taken the exam have said to me is that they felt pressured. When you sit down in a normal format exam, a CBT exam, you have the capability to go to answer questions that you want to answer. So if you get a question saying, what's the definition of this? Okay, I know that, I'll answer that. And my next question is, what is the difference between this and this and this? Okay, I'll need to think about that, so I don't want to answer that now. So I'll go ahead and I'll mark that, and I'll come back to that later. Because what I want to do is I want to go through the exam, I want to answer the questions that I know, and I want to come back and then look at the ones that are more difficult for me. So you don't have that. You don't have that capability. You don't have that control. In the CAT format, the system is deciding what questions you're getting. So if you keep getting definition type questions, if they seem to be the same type of questions, I would say to you, slow down. Okay, you're doing something incorrect. You're either doing knee-jerk reactions to the questions being asked, or you're not reading the thing correctly. Read the question, read the context, read the answers, and if you have to read it a couple of times, understand what is being asked here. Okay, understand that before you actually commit to an answer. And then once you commit to an answer, you can't change it. You can't go back. So be comfortable with that, commit to it, and then move on. Now, in terms of how does the exam end? Okay, there's basically 3 different ways that an exam can end. And in the same way that you would construct firewall rules, whereby the first rule gets applied, and if it doesn't count, then the second rule, and then the third rule, same concept here. The very first rule that the system will look at is what's called the confidence interval rule. What does that mean? It means that the exam will end when the candidate has passed a minimum exam length, i.e. 100 questions, and the computer has determined with a 95% statistical confidence that the candidate has displayed a certain ability. So if the computer determines that the candidate can no longer achieve a passing score based on the statistical data, then the candidate will fail. However, if the computer can determine that the candidate can no longer achieve achieve that score, then they will pass. Okay, so that confidence rule gets applied first. If the confidence rule doesn't apply or isn't invoked, then the maximum allotted length rule will apply. And in this rule, the exam will end when the candidate has reached a maximum number of questions allowed to achieve a passing score. So the computer will examine the previous 75 questions. Now, why 75? Remember we said that you're looking for a minimum of 100 questions. You're going to be based out of that, but 25 of those could be psychometrical evaluation. So really, the computer is going to say, let's take 75, because 100 minus 25 is 75. Let's take 75 questions, and if the candidate's estimated ability remains above a passing standard for the entire time, then they pass. But if the candidate's estimated ability is dropped below a passing standard at any time, then they will fail. Okay, so it's kind of a sudden death type judgment. Third way that an exam can end is going to be running out of time. Okay, and now this rule will apply if the other 2 rules don't get invoked first. and the exam will end when they've reached the maximum allowed time for the test, i.e. 3 hours, in which case the computer will examine the previous 75 scored questions, and if the candidate's estimated ability is above passing standard, you pass. If it's below or has dropped below that standard at any point in time, you will fail. Okay? Or if the candidate has not answered 75 scored questions in a 3-hour period, then they will fail as well. So that's essential. So you can see it's very much based upon the computer's assessment of how well you're doing. That's why it's very hard to know exactly how you're doing in this exam. That's where people get a little bit concerned, because they feel that they're not getting the feedback. They don't know how well they're doing. And that's why I'm saying to you, just be in the moment. Okay, there's things about this exam format that you cannot control, so don't try to control them. Be in the moment, do the best that you can with the questions in front of you, and then move forward from there. Okay, what about getting results? You will get your results immediately. Now, it's not immediately. You won't get them sitting at the computer. Why? Because people either breaking down in tears at the computer screen, seeing that they failed, or jumping up and down and cheering will actually disturb everyone else in the room. So what happens is there is a check-in process that occurs whereby a biometric scan, i.e. your fingerprint or an iris scan or something, will be taken of you at the start. You will end the exam, you'll call the proctor over, he'll finish up, they'll log you out, you'll go out of the room to the examiner's workstation. They will re-verify you against the biometric sample to say that you're actually the person who took the exam. And then if you are that person, then they will print out your results. And generally then what they will do, the proctor will do, is they'll fold it over, they'll give it to you, they'll ask you to leave the area. That way then you'll get to see the results once you're away from earshot of everyone. Now, if you passed, it'll just say you passed, okay? And that's all you need to know. It doesn't say how well you've done or whatever. If you have failed, it will give you some sort of diagnostic feedback in terms of your strengths and weaknesses for each domain. Now, the next question is if you have failed, well, okay, how soon can I retake? Well, you can retake, and I apologize for the typo here. It's not 3 times, it's 3 times in a 12-month period. And the way it works is this: if the candidate doesn't pass on the first try, then they have to wait 30 days before retesting. If they don't pass the second try, they have to wait 90 days. If they don't pass the third try, they have to wait 180 days. If they don't pass the third try also, and if they don't pass after that, then they really need to re-examine how they're going about doing their study. Now, talking of which, that's a good segue for this, because one of the things that people ask often is, well, how do I study? What is the best way to study? If you go online and you Google CISSP exam preparation, there is all sorts of offerings. There is discount ones. We have a 6,000% pass rate ones and so on. I would say ignore all of those stats, okay? Because number one, you can't verify them. Number two, it doesn't really mean anything to you. What is important to you is what type of learner are you? And there's basically 3 different learning types, okay? And we are a mixture of the 3. There's tactile, you want to put hands on something. There is visual, you want to see something. There's auditory, where you want to hear something. I'm around about 95% visual with some tactile and virtually no auditory. Other people might be the reverse of that. So it's important to have a preparation system that will let you use those different learning styles that apply to you. Now, and also it's important to have a system that will let you test yourself. So you study, you have somewhere to go to ask some questions, you have some way of being able to practice what you know, you have some way of being able to take action in terms of updating based upon the practice, the results of the practice, and therefore study more. So let's just say I find that I do a practice test and I'm really bad in physical security. Well, my take action is going to be study more physical security. So, and I have a chat. So has the CAT testing already started for English tests? Yes, it has. Okay. So I'm sorry. How do you know if you will get 100 or 150 questions? Well, you'll get the questions as they come. Okay. And the thing is, depending on how well the computer is thinking you're doing, it may stop you at 100 questions because it may invoke that confidence rule and say, you know what, you're answering really good questions and you're good. And it may say, and when you get to the minimum threshold of 100, it may say you've answered these 100 well enough to convince me that you know your stuff, therefore you've passed. If it's not, if it's a little bit more ambiguous, then they might have you do more questions than that. Okay, so it'll be decided upon by the computer. Now, our sponsors, Mission Critical Institute, do have an offering which includes all of the above. Okay, they do have an online series of instruction. They have a scheduled approach where they break down a structured approach. They have live office hours. They've got add-on labs that you can do and so on. So if you want to find more information about that, then the link above is Mission Critical Institute/edu/courses, and I encourage you to go and have a look at that. So I would just want to answer a couple of questions that we got earlier. Okay, one of the questions was about the format. Okay, why is it changing? Why did CISSP decide to change the format? Well, they looked at the old format and they said, you know what, this one size fits all doesn't necessarily suit everyone. So the adaptive format is going to bring three things. Number one, it's more efficient because the average amount of time is going to be less than the 6 hours mandated by the other by the exam. Number two, it's more reliable because you get more precise evaluation of the candidate's abilities and questions being geared to that. And number three, it's more secure because the chances of the same question being asked repeatedly are less because they're constantly changing. Secondly, remember that you got your 25 unscored questions, so they are going to fit into that mix. Another question is, will the candidate's probability of passing the exam change? No, it won't. Okay, it's going to be the same content. It's just the way that the content is being asked is different, so there may be a different psychological aspect that you need to consider. A third question is, what is the best way to prepare for the exam? Well, the slide that we showed you, whereby you figure out what are my different learning styles, and you then adapt your preparation to that learning style that is most dominant in your particular setup. And then finally, fifth question is, will there be a change in the actual price of the exam? No, there won't. I can't remember the exact price. I think it's around about $600, but ISC² website is always going to have that information. So we are coming to the end of our 30 minutes, and so I just want to take this time to be able to thank Mission Critical Institute who sponsored this webinar. And remember, I will try to get to this last chat question. What is the application process like? Okay, we actually cover that in one of our other seminars. So tune in for those, and I'll be able to answer that in more detail then, because it'll take me longer than we have time in the remainder of this seminar. So that is my presentation to you. I hope that you've got something from it. Again, I'd like to thank Mission Critical Institute, and please do remember that we have other presentations coming up, and we'll be hopefully then answering some more of your questions in those other presentations. and I see 8:30. So I'd like to thank you, and tune in again for future presentations. Goodbye.